And this is our agenda for tonight. So we're into the introduction part right now and the agenda review. And then at 8:05 we'll go into John Loretz's presentation on the NPT and the Humanitarian Initiative. This is a very timely moment for this NPT webinar because the NPT actually gets started right at the NPT Review Conference gets started at the end of this month. And then right at the conclusion of John's presentation, we'll go into questions. If you have questions specifically for John about his presentation and clarifications, then that's the time to do that. That'll be at about 8:30. And then at 8:40, I'm going to present a few slides about things that you can do, organizing projects and political activity that we can do to affect change here in the United States. And then at the conclusion of that, hopefully there'll be some time left for some additional discussion and questions. And so that's the way that we've mapped out the webinar tonight. That's what you can expect. And so around 8:30, if you have your little hand icon next to your name on my chart here, then I'll be calling on people with their questions. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. This is John Loretz. He's from the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. IPPW consists of affiliates in 64 countries. And in the United States, Physicians for Social Responsibility is the affiliate of IPPNW. So this is the global version of PSR. International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1985 for their efforts to stave off nuclear weapons catastrophe. And they're still working towards that today. So John Loretz is IPPNW's program director. John's been working for decades to rid the world of these wretched nuclear weapons, and we're so glad that he's still working on it now. Let's see, I have one more slide. Here's a picture that was taken in New York last year, and that's me on the left with my tie much too long. And these are, all four of these people are nuclear weapons, nuclear disarmament organizers. John is the guy with the sweater on, and the other fellows in this picture are one of our PSR board members, Andy Cantor, and Magnus Lobold, who until recently was an organizer with ICANN. So there you go. There's a little picture of us. And with that, John, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Martin, and thanks for that picture. If any of you were doubted Martin's saying that I've been doing this for decades, I guess the picture kind of gives it away. I'm trying to make my screen work here. All right, I think that's probably doing it. What Martin doesn't know maybe or forgot is that actually in the late 80s I was PSR's communications director as well. So and for one very brief month I was PSR's executive director, although that felt like a whole lot more than a month.
Wow.
So thank you for taking some time out to join this webinar tonight, and again thanks to Martin for inviting me to speak with you. I'm going to try to, in about the first 10 minutes, give you an overview of a treaty that's existed for 45 years now. So bear with me if it gets very condensed and goes by very fast. As Martin said, this is an opportune time to be doing this because the NPT Review Conference will be opening at the end of the month in New York. But I think even a better reason to be doing this now is because of the incredible change in the landscape regarding nuclear disarmament that has occurred over the last 2 to 3 years now, because of the movement on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons that's really given us a whole kind of renewed way of looking at the medical, environmental, humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and given us a whole new slew of arguments and strategies for getting rid of the things. So let's start right out with the NPT. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons was opened for signature in 1968, and enough states signed and ratified it for it to enter into force in 1970. So this is the 45th year of the treaty coming up. It was originally given a 25-year period, at which point the member parties had to decide what to do with it, to extend it, to make it permanent, extend it indefinitely, or decide it had done its job and get rid of it. They decided after some very serious and difficult debate about the lack of progress on the disarmament side of things to extend it indefinitely and institute a cycle of 5-year review conferences to evaluate the progress of the treaty. I'm going to look at a few of the key ones on that in just a minute, but it now has 190 member states in it. That's the largest state participation in any international treaty. And it's held up now for 45 years. There are 5 nuclear-armed members of the NPT, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK. There's nothing in the NPT, and I think a lot of people don't really understand this, there's nothing in the NPT that recognizes these nuclear weapon states, grants them any kind of official status. So these are not official NPT member states, nuclear armed states rather, although they like to portray themselves that way. The only thing mentioned, their names are never mentioned in the treaty. China and France, in fact, didn't join the treaty until 1992. Article 9 of the treaty defines a nuclear weapon state as one that had tested nuclear weapons or exploded a nuclear test device before January 1967. That's the only reference made to a nuclear armed state other than the obligations they have to get rid of these weapons. The nuclear armed non-members of the NPT are India, Pakistan, and Israel. North Korea, the DPRK, was an NPT member until 2003 when they withdrew and became a nuclear weapon state. That withdrawal from the NPT is actually contested by the other member parties, and that situation has never been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. So this is still a contentious issue. This is the basic bargain of the NPT. Under Article 2, the non-nuclear weapon states agree that they'll never acquire nuclear weapons, and there's a lot of other detail that goes along with that, the things that they're not allowed to do and that the nuclear armed states are not allowed to share with them. In Article 6, the nuclear armed states agree to pursue good faith negotiations to completely eliminate their nuclear weapons. And then Article 4, which we're not going to talk about tonight because it just complicates things too much and is really kind of the poison pill in this treaty, which is all of the stuff about the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which actually complicates the non-proliferation side of this thing enormously. But as I say, there's no time to really talk about that, so I won't. It's good to know that the very first line of the treaty cites, and this is a quote, "the devastation that would be visited upon all mankind by a nuclear war." That's really going to be the reference point for everything that I have to say here. The preamble also says that the parties desire, quote, "to further the easing of international tension and the strengthening of trust between states in order to facilitate the cessation of the manufacture of nuclear weapons, the liquidation of all their existing stockpiles, and the elimination from national arsenals of nuclear weapons and the means of their delivery, pursuant to a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control." So disarmament and dismantlement and elimination of nuclear weapons was set out as a clear goal of this treaty. This is Article 6 in its entirety. And unfortunately, and not accidentally, this article contains no timelines, and this is something that's been exploited by the nuclear weapon states from the very beginning to stall and to delay and to come up with all kinds of excuses as to why they can't really bring this task to completion. But I wanted to really draw to your attention the first few words of this article. It says, each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith. This is not a responsibility that's left only to the nuclear armed states who happen to be members of this treaty. This is a responsibility given to all states. And that's something that is also going to become very important when we get to the HINW movement. So I said that there's a 5-year cycle of review conferences that has been happening since 1995. The 1995 Review and Extension Conference, there was really a lot of deep frustration during that review conference over the lack of progress on disarmament despite the end of the Cold War. And if you remember back to the preamble that I read an excerpt from a little while ago, it said, to further the easing of international tension and the strengthening of trust between states in order to facilitate the cessation of the manufacture of nuclear weapons. They said in 1995, at the end of the Cold War, you know what, we've achieved that. We've achieved the easing of international tensions. The time is now ripe to eliminate nuclear weapons. And you know, if and when we extend this conference, we want you to get really serious about that. Here we are 20 years later, and you can see how far we've gotten. 1995 also produced the first resolution on a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, which has continued to be problematic over the years. A few things have happened in those 20 years since 1995, but not nuclear disarmament and not nearly enough to really fundamentally alter the landscape for disarmament. The 2000 conference tried to build on 1995. This review was famous for the phrase unequivocal undertaking. This is words that the nuclear armed states said to make the point that they were serious about nuclear disarmament. They said they would undertake and they would commit themselves to an unequivocal undertaking to eliminate nuclear weapons. And there was sort of an initial version of an action plan that became known as the 13 practical steps, most of which still remain to be taken today. The 2005 review conference fell apart for a number of reasons. It's a pretty unanimous opinion that that conference was a failure. Chief among the reasons was that the U.S. under the Bush-Cheney administration walked away from that 2000 outcome and really used that review conference for a pretty single-focused attack on Iran. There were other reasons as well, but that was really the primary one. The 2005 failure also really exposed the politicization of the NPT process, and it prompted the sort of beginnings of some explorations of alternatives to achieve nuclear disarmament, should the NPT not be able to get its act back together. In 2010, the words catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons appeared twice in the outcome document, and that's really the first time since the treaty was written and those words kind of showed up in the preamble that idea had really come back to in any serious way in these review conferences. So in 2010, the outcome of the review conference produced a 64-point action plan, and 22 of those 64 actions pertained to nuclear disarmament. Of the 22, only about 5 have seen any definite progress so far, and 4 out of those 5 are related to the testing moratorium, to the CTBT, to the CTBT organization, and these were all things that were happening anyway. So it's a little hard to see these as active responses to this action plan. The U.S.-Russia New START was brought into what was adopted in between the review conferences, and this was a positive step. But that came attached with modernization programs that the Senate forced upon the administration in order to get ratification, and those have really, as we know, have undermined that progress in some pretty serious ways, and there's really been no follow-up in terms of subsequent negotiations between the U.S. and Russia since then. There have been, one of the actions, or a couple of them, specified work on new nuclear weapon-free zones, and there's been none of that. And the one that was most important, the Middle East nuclear and weapons of mass destruction-free zone, was supposed to have a conference in Helsinki at the end of 2012, and that was suspended primarily because of Israel's refusal to participate. So what are the prospects for 2015? So I'm going to look at some of the negative ones first and then a few of the positive ones. It's pretty likely that the nuclear armed states are, well, they always do this. They try to embellish what they've done in terms of disarmament to make the record look a whole lot better than it really was. And they'll try to explain away the lack of progress on the disarmament elements of the action plan. Because of changes in the world situation, whatever else they come up with. They are probably going to, we're probably going to see a rollover of the existing action plan, again, without any timelines. There were no real timelines other than the Middle East conference in this one. And we know that the nuclear armed states, including the United States, don't want any timelines added this time, and they just want to just say the action plan is something that is a work in progress and can go on for years and years and years just as it is, and it's not meant to impose any kind of deadlines on them. I think there'll probably be an attempt to revive the conference on the Middle East zone. The U.S. and others, I think, have a sincere interest in trying to make that happen. The Obama administration has certainly made that a priority. I don't know that there's a whole lot they can do in the absence of Israeli cooperation to make that happen. And there are just so many other problems in the region right now that are interfering with the prospects for getting that conference together anytime soon that I don't know what they're going to be able to come up with that's any kind of breakthrough on that. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. Now I did this slide before today's news. So we'll see what happens. There are always attempts to divert attention to Iran, and that's not going to go away just because this new framework has been agreed to. You know, we know that the Senate is certainly not going to go for this in any way. So this is not the end of the problem with Iran just because we had a good announcement today. Whether that will now be brought back into the NPT in an attempt to sort of distract attention from everything else, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see now. And I don't expect to see any really new and substantial measures of success. And by that I mean the nuclear armed states in particular like to sort of stand behind the narrative that everything is moving along just fine, just about as fast as it can, and we're making progress. We don't really need to have any different kind of measures for evaluating our compliance with this treaty. A lot of us beg to differ, and so that's the next slide. What we're really hoping to see in this review conference is a real shift to the focus on humanitarian impacts, to this whole movement that's been developing and growing and gaining momentum really ever since Norway announced the first conference in Oslo that happened in March of 2013. Austria, which hosted the conference in December of last year, is going to be bringing the evidence from all three conferences into this review conference and sort of offering the member parties an opportunity to bring this evidence into their treaty deliberations and to use it as the basis for some kind of dramatic new movement towards disarmament. And you know, it's not going to just be an opportunity, it's going to be kind of a challenge as well. A challenge to the NPT to really get its act together and complete the task that it was given the responsibility to do. So the Austrian Pledge will be introduced into the NPT by Austria as part of the core work. The member states of the treaty are going to be challenged to fill the legal gap that exists within the treaty because of the lack of timelines attached to Article 6 and because of the fact that there is at the present time no explicit legal instrument that prohibits nuclear weapons in the same way that chemical, biological weapons, landmines, things like that are prohibited. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that before we're done. So that's, you know, that we know that this is going to be brought into the NPT. It's a little difficult to gauge yet exactly what the response to that will be. But there are an awful lot of member parties in the NPT who have been active participants in these conferences and who we know are going to want to see this taken seriously. So. All right, so that's the NPT, and now I had to fit this slide in somewhere, so it seems like we'll call this intermission. This is like a little break in the action here before I get on to the humanitarian impact movement itself. So the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, IPPW launched this campaign in 2007. At the time, it was pretty much solely an IPPW campaign. It was nurtured in Australia for a few years through a grant that our Australian affiliate was able to get. It started out as a campaign to come in behind the Nuclear Weapons Convention, and one of the first acts of the campaign was to publish a second edition of the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention that IPPNW had helped to draft back in the 1990s. So I'm not going to go through the whole history of ICAN, but it is now, about 7 years later, a really broad campaign coalition that's global, that has now 424 partner organizations in 95 countries. IPPNW is now the lead medical organization in the campaign, and the strategy has evolved and developed over the years, and we have now become a civil society campaign that's working for a treaty to ban nuclear weapons in all of their aspects. And so this is sort of our answer to filling the legal gap. And we'll talk a little bit about this treaty before we're done. IPPNW and ICAN had a major role in all three of the HINW conferences. IPPNW doctors, including Ira Helfand, Masao Tomonaga from Japan, some others, made presentations during these conferences from the floor. We had a lot of participation with Red Cross and Red Crescent colleagues, which was really great, and I think this has sort of brought IPPNW and the Red Cross much closer together in a collegial kind of way, and that's been a good thing to see. ICAN organized a lot of the civil society presence around all three conferences, and this was at the invitation of the state sponsors of the conferences in each case. So there's been a partnership developing in that regard between the state movers of this process and ICAN as a major civil society campaign and organizer around the humanitarian impact team. Did I lose a slide? No. Okay. So, going back now to the NPT just briefly, the final document of the 2010 NPT Review Conference, this is what I mentioned before. This is where the language showed up, where for the first time, really since the start of the treaty, this language about catastrophic humanitarian consequences was brought back into an outcome document and sort of framed as a central motivating force behind the entire treaty. This was taken up almost immediately by a small group of states at first, including Norway, Austria, Switzerland, a few others, who put together what has now turned into a series of joint statements on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons that have been submitted at a series of important UN meetings. So the first one was submitted at the 2012 Preparatory Committee meeting for this review conference and was signed by 16 states. A second version of this was brought to the General Assembly that October, and the numbers had grown to 35 states endorsing this. The 2013 PrepCom, an updated version, drew 80 states. In 2013, the General Assembly, we were up to 125 states. Last October at the General Assembly, we made it to 155 states who have signed on to these joint statements. A new one will be brought into this NPT Review Conference. We're hoping to add a few to that number, but when you think about it, 160 is probably about the maximum you could possibly get, and we're nearly there. And this is what those statements say. They're all very similar. They've been refined a little bit from version to version. But we firmly believe that awareness of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons must underpin all approaches and efforts towards nuclear disarmament. The only way to guarantee that nuclear weapons will never be used again is through their total elimination. What language like this is doing is transforming the whole dialogue about nuclear disarmament away from the kind of outdated, tired old arguments that we always hear about deterrence and stability, and we need to keep these weapons for a little while longer because we need to make sure that the world is a safe enough place not to have them, ridiculous things like that, to a really clear and renewed understanding of what these weapons are and what they do, and why that makes it so urgent to get rid of them. So the momentum growing behind these kinds of statements is another sign that way of thinking about things is really taking hold. So I mentioned there were 3 conferences on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. The first one in Oslo in March of 2013, the second one in Mexico, and the third one in Vienna, both of those last year. Again, growing number of states who came to each one, 128, 146, 158. It's not a numbers game, but the fact that the more people came to understand why these conferences were important and what it was they were really dealing with, and the voice that it gave them as non-nuclear weapon states primarily to speak their mind about nuclear weapons and about nuclear disarmament in a way that isn't controlled by the nuclear weapon states as it is in the NPT, was really, really vitalizing, I think, for a lot of people. In Vienna, as you know, the U.S. finally came and the UK came. They broke the boycott, the P5 boycott, which had been in place for the other 2 conferences. The U.S. didn't behave especially well, but they were there, and I think it was a good learning experience for the folks from the State Department who went to that conference. So now the meat of this. What were the outcomes of these conferences? Well, I think it's fair to say that the outcome is what IPPW and PSR and other groups like ours have been saying for as long as we've existed. Pointing out and showing the evidence for the the really catastrophic damage to health and the environment that would occur if nuclear weapons were ever used again, the fact that the consequences of a nuclear war would be on such a large scale that they would possibly even be irreversible, and understanding that the risks that these weapons could be used are actually growing. They haven't gone away with the Cold War. They're actually growing and increasing over time. The idea, which is not just an IPPW conclusion, but something that's shared by the Red Cross and by the WHO and by the international medical community and relief agencies pretty much across the board, is that no state or international body could possibly mount a meaningful response, either a medical response or a relief response to a nuclear war. And then that there's the recognition, I guess, that there's no existing comprehensive legal norm that currently prohibits the possession, transfer, production, and use of nuclear weapons. So this is all stuff that, as I said, is going to be brought into the NPT, and the evidence will be made available to all of the state parties. I think it's also interesting to note that these conferences were really the first time in the history of the nuclear age that states have come together to examine this evidence, the evidence about medical, environmental, and humanitarian consequences. We've talked about it, some people would say incessantly, but states in an organized way have never really come together and done this, and that's shocking in a way, but it's also kind of gratifying that it's finally happening, and that not only has our work been validated, but we've really been at the center of these conferences in a lot of ways, especially IPPW's work on nuclear famine, which the more people came to understand that, I watched it happen in these conferences as people learned about this. It was like a wake-up call. You know, the number of people who said, all right, we've got to do something about this, was pretty impressive. So, humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons as a game changer. That phrase game changer was actually used by Angela Kane, who is the former head of the Office of Disarmament Affairs, the High Commissioner of oh geez, I can't remember all of these UN titles. But she was the head of the whole disarmament game in the UN, and she called this a game changer. All right, so these are some of the important things about HINW and why it's this game changer. And I think one of the most important ones, other than the urgency that it restores and the new language that it provides for us that we haven't been using in quite a while, is really this fact that it empowers the non-nuclear weapon states to take the responsibility that the NPT actually gives them to work directly on disarmament themselves and not leave this to the nuclear weapon states, where, you know, it's been languishing for the last 45 years and would easily languish for another 45 years if it stays there. By giving them some power to take this head on and to come up with proposals and initiatives of their own, it's really made an enormous difference in the landscape as we head into this review. So what is the Austrian Pledge? That's it. Those are our words, pretty much directly from the pledge itself. Interestingly, we never saw this coming. We knew that there was going to be a strong outcome statement, that the evidence was going to be organized in a really powerful way by the Austrian ministry by the end of that conference. The big question was, where do we go from here, and what's going to happen now in a political sense? And we were pretty much knocked off our feet when the foreign minister came out and read this pledge. The key concept here is that they've pledged to work with all relevant stakeholders to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons. They haven't said this is a ban treaty campaign. We've said that. They haven't said that yet. We have to still make that case that the ban treaty is the best way to fill this legal gap. But the fact that they've now put out this call and invited states to join this pledge is really, I think, one of the most significant things that's happened in terms of nuclear disarmament, and probably in as long as I've been doing this work. It's just incredibly exciting to see this happening. As of a few days ago, I meant to look at the website today and I haven't, but I don't think this number has changed. 61 states have associated with the Austrian Pledge, and we're thinking that there might be as many as 20 more who do so before the review conference starts. But that's just sort of based on a sense of who's considering it pretty seriously over the next couple of weeks. But 61 states in the first few months since this pledge went out. And to associate with it, your Ministry of Foreign Affairs needs to send what's called a note verbal to the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that this makes it kind of official. So they've got 61 of these things from states. What happens after the NPT review? I'm not trying to be coy with these question marks, but I think we don't want to prejudge the outcome of the review conference. And so to say what needs to happen after it really does depend in a lot of ways on what happens at it. But I think it's fair to say that from our point of view, we need to see that the humanitarian impact movement has really become the driving force behind banning and eliminating nuclear weapons within the NPT context. It's going to happen whether or not it happens within the NPT or any other UN institution for that matter. We know that many states view the NPT as the best and really the only tool we have and would prefer to see it strengthened rather than heading off to some alternative process. But we've now gone through 4 review cycles over 20 years without a single breakthrough. And it's time for that breakthrough. We think this is it. And my own view, which is really shared by many of us, is that the NPT is just not up to this challenge. It's held captive by a dysfunctional process. The member states allow its vague language and internal contradictions to be much too easily exploited by states with particular agendas. And this really needs to be the last indecisive review cycle. So it's up to the NPT now to do something decisive. If they do, we'll see what it is and if it's something that we can really work with. If they don't, we'll have to start looking at the alternatives. The ban treaty that ICANN has been talking about could be one of those alternatives, but it could also be something that complements the NPT. It doesn't have to be seen as something that is strictly outside of the NPT. Nuclear weapons are the only weapons of mass destruction right now, aside from being the worst ones. They're the only ones that are not subject to an explicit legal prohibition. All of these others have been banned, prohibited by a treaty. So what would a ban treaty be? It's pretty simple. It can be pretty simple. It would be a legally binding instrument that clearly prohibits nuclear weapons based on their consequences. We think it's the most effective way to fill the legal gap that's identified in the Austrian Pledge. We also think it's the most feasible means to fulfill Article 6 of the NPT. The point of this is to empower others to act, as I've said. Including to act upon the nuclear weapon states to do the right thing. If we have to wait for the nuclear weapon states to show leadership, we're going to wait forever. There's no question that they need to sit at a table and negotiate disarmament, and the question really is how to get them there. We see the ban treaty as a way to bring the power of the international community behind them in the form of a legal instrument that establishes a legal norm as a way of pressing them to get to that table. We're still in the very early stages of thinking about what a ban treaty might look like. It could be short, simple, and normative, and leave the details of disarmament to subsequent negotiations that would have to include the nuclear armed states. Or it could be more prescriptive about timelines and implementation steps. We hope and expect that civil society will have a role in developing this treaty, but it's going to be negotiated by states. and states in the end are going to have to decide what they want. What we've said clearly is that whatever process is finally chosen, whether it's inside the NPT, inside a UN institution, the Conference on Disarmament, whatever, or whether it's outside in some way, the process has to be open to every state, but it can't be blockable by any state. And so that means no vetoes, and the rigid consensus rules that have blocked up the NPT for so many years can't apply here. Any way you look at this, it's not going to be easy, but this train has left the station, and it really is picking up speed. And I'm kind of excited to be on it. So that's it. I want to end with a slide that points you towards some resources. And let's see if I'm going to let you look at that for a second. Some of them are IPPW resources that you'll find on our blog, on an online campaign kit that we developed for the Vienna conference. ICANN itself has a lot of resources about the ban treaty and sort of campaign activities and literature and documents that you can get there. For the NPT itself, there's the NPT website that is run on a UN server, but really just about the best site for any kind of documents or analysis of the NPT is on the Reaching Critical Will site. And if you don't know what Reaching Critical Will is, it's a project of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. They really are considered in a lot of ways kind of the official archivist of disarmament materials that are presented and discussed at a lot of these different UN-based meetings. They do a fantastic job of archiving everything and doing a lot of really serious first-rate analysis of everything, and I really encourage you to use that. Let me just see if I can, no pun intended. It looks like maybe oh, wait. Do you see that? Do you see that? Okay, this is the IPPW blog. If you can see my cursor going across humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, this is the page I pointed you to on that last slide, and from here you can get links to the programs and documents from all three of those conferences. You can get the texts of all of the joint statements on the humanitarian impact that I was just telling you about. You can access all of the IPPW resources on humanitarian impacts, including the campaign kit and a lot of specific ICANN and Red Cross resources as well, which is really good stuff. So just so you know that all of that is there, that you can put your hands on it easily, and I encourage you to do that. And with that, I'm going to drink some water and wait for some questions.
Wow, that looked like a lot of work, John. Thank you for pointing that out to us. And this is Martin Fleck, and I'm the Security Program Director and sort of your host tonight. And we will have a very quick question and answer period, and then I have a couple more slides about things that we can do here in the United States to promote this campaign, since the United States is in fact crucial. I see that we have a question from Bob Dodge, and Bob, I'm going to unmute you, and so you can ask your question. And if I don't hear you, then I'll probably, then I think you put it into the website. But here we go. Okay.
Yeah, okay, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, John. Hey, thanks. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to clarify the difference between the 61 sign-on states versus the approximate 160 states we've been discussing also. Just so I can clarify that for writing purposes. What are we at?
You're asking what the difference is between the 61 and the 155?
Yes, exactly.
The 155 have simply signed a statement that says the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons are a serious problem that need to be at the center of disarmament discussions. Okay. The pledge itself is a pledge to join a group that plans to do something about this.
Got it. Okay.
And so it really is a step up from that into more of, it hasn't quite clarified itself yet in this sense, but we're looking at it as sort of the beginnings of a core group that will really take political action, we hope.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, John, we have another request, actually, which is from Michael D. Filippo, and he is asking you to go back to your slide with the links.
Yep.
Think you can do that?
I can. There it is.
And there you go. Thank you. That way we can study that. Now, I'm looking for anybody else to be raising their hand or throwing me a question in my question box. And I don't see any. So therefore, I'm inclined to try and keep this thing on schedule by...
which I apparently didn't do. Sorry about that.
But it is a complex topic. You did a fantastic job of telling a long story in a very short amount of time. No worries there. So therefore, Julia, if I could have my screen back, I will put this on. Okay. And I will put this on. Oh, not such a good idea. Turn it. I will put this on this slide. And this is how can I participate? The United States is crucial to, the United States is going to eventually get rid of all of its nuclear weapons. Either that or we're going to see some of them used. So there is no realistic alternative. It's just a matter of how are we going to convince the United States to get rid of all of its nuclear weapons. Positions for Social Responsibility in the United States is working to build evidence and to demonstrate that there's political will for disarmament here in the United States. And so, for instance, we look for media hooks where it'll be easier for us to get this message across, teachable moments, as it were. And the last one would have been in January when the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved their doomsday clock up 2 minutes. And we have a network of 15 chapters around the country who belong to the security program of PSR, and volunteers worked diligently to come up with op-eds to submit responding to the bulletin's movement of the clock. So we're looking for additional media hooks coming up in the future, and this last one we managed to generate 23 op-eds, some national, some local. So the next big thing that's coming up, John's been talking about the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, and that gets underway on April the 27th. Just prior to that, a coalition of something like 280 organizations have come together to put on this Peace and Planet mobilization in New York City. And so if you're somewhere near New York City, you should try to go to this conference on April 24th and 25th, and a rally, march, and peace festival on April the 26th. We're hearing that there's at least 1,000 Japanese citizens are coming over for this, yeah, we're expecting this to be pretty big and a good media handle. Now, if you want to know about, it should be getting into the news that this is happening on those days, so we want to use that as a media hook, and the website is there, peaceandplanet.org. The other thing related to that and during that is going to be the Global Wave 2015. So, of course, everyone can't get to New York in person for the event. But on April the 26th, this Global Wave will go all the way around the world through every time zone, starting in New York, starting in the Eastern time zone, I think about 2 o'clock on April the 26th, and it's going to go all the way around the world. And so, for instance, in Bethlehem, the Bethlehem Christmas Church is going to be ringing their church bells as part of the Global Wave. So if you want to look into that, just Google Global Wave 2015. I encourage, I know that TSRLA, for instance, has jumped onto this, and they're going to be participating in it. It's something that you can do whatever time zone you're in, unless you got access to the internet. Now, we are very interested in folks getting politically active. This is our board president, Lynn Ringenberg, and she's obviously roaming the halls of Congress in this picture. But we encourage you folks that are on the phone to consider becoming citizen lobbyists and we would love to work with you and put you together with other like-minded citizens wherever you live. And let's get this issue in front of the elected officials, your representatives and senators. Some of them are in favor of this, but we have a long ways to go to convince our elected officials to get behind banning and eliminating nuclear weapons. So for starters, the legislation that we've been working on just in the last couple of weeks, this was introduced in March. It's the SANE Act, Smarter Approach to Nuclear Expenditures, and it would cut $100 billion out of the nuclear weapons budget over the next 10 years. So that's the sort of thing that if you were willing to talk to your legislators, you could do so. I put on a list here of the known sponsors so far, 4 in the Senate, including Markey, who introduced it, and in the House there's 12. So there's plenty of room for lots more representatives and senators to get on board. And, you know, this is something that's between here and a ban that would be at least slowing the crazy modernization of all of our nuclear weapons forces. And then the next really big media hook that will be coming up after the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference will be the 70th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. And so we will be also generating letters to the editor and op-eds, radio interviews, anything you can do when a lot of communities around the country and, in fact, around the world will be commemorating these tragedies that happened 70 years ago. The picture on the top is taiko drummers in Portland, Oregon, and on the left is the traditional lantern floating ceremony in Seattle at Green Lake. And then that at the bottom is that picture was actually taken in Hiroshima, and that's the peace dome in the background. So we encourage you to get involved. We in the security program have embarked on a continual process of working with the media and working with elected officials to promote the Austrian Pledge, to promote disarmament, to promote cutting back on the projected $1 trillion investment that the country is planning to make in nuclear weapons modernization and upkeep over the next 30 years. And so I put on here, down here you've got an email address for myself and for Teresa Schaefer, who is our intrepid security outreach associate. And the two of us have split up the various chapters in the United States. So if you'd like to get involved and you'd like to know more about what we're doing with regards to legislators, please use those email addresses. And you'll be getting an email, follow-up email from us as well, and I'll be sure to put those email addresses on there. So at that point, John, do you have anything to add that I left out?
I don't think so. Only to say maybe that you know, for so long everyone has
muted.
Important, and that's important, and that would be great. But leadership can take a lot of forms, and U.S. leadership can come from folks like you, and us, in addition to the government. And leadership is also coming from all of these folks around the world and all of these states around the world that I was talking about. And that's a really exciting thing. It's something that I hope folks in the U.S. would learn more about and welcome.
Okay, are there any more questions? I'm unmuting people in case you have questions. We have a lot of work to do. And John, we really appreciate the effort that you're putting in and the fact that you're willing to do this webinar with us tonight and educate us about what's going on. John has given us a lot of resources to look into. I will ensure that the emails that go out after this include the URLs for all of those resources. John, What's the very next step?
What's the very next step?
Going to put on the... Right?
I think the very next step is to make sure that the people in the U.S. know about the Austrian Pledge and understand what it is and understand the promise that it holds for actually getting rid of these weapons. And I think that's a good job for PSR to take on.
So the Austrian Pledge must not be the tree that fell in the forest.
That's right. Nobody heard. Except everybody else in the world is hearing that tree fall. So let's get some noise in the U.S. about it as well.
Let's take down the wall around the United States so that the American population can hear that this is happening all over the world. All right. Well, with that, I've got everybody unmuted. Any last questions? We sure do appreciate everybody getting on the call tonight. And we have our marching orders. We know what we need to do, so we'll
Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.